A new ranking says India is Asia's third most powerful country. Every year, Australia's Lowy Institute releases a comprehensive ranking that measures national power, economic relationships, military hard power, cultural influence, and political resilience. All of these factors weigh into these geopolitical rankings of Asia's most powerful nations. And in 2024, the Asia Power Index has some good news for India. It has overtaken Japan to become Asia's third most powerful country. India's impressive economic growth, its massive young population, and its growing military and diplomatic influence have propelled the country forward. But what exactly is India doing right? And what could it do better? On this episode of Threadbare, we talk about why India is increasingly becoming one of Asia's great powers. So let's get into it. The Asia Power Index assigns countries a total score out of 100, with countries judged across 8 categories. These are economic capability, military capability, resilience, future resources, cultural influence, diplomatic influence, economic relationships, and defense networks. Now, based on all of this, here's how the rankings ended up. America ended up the most powerful country in Asia with a score of 81.7 on 100. Now, yes, America isn't technically an Asian country, but it is an Indo-Pacific nation and a major power player in the region, which explains why it's in this ranking. Now, China was second with a national power score of 72.7. And following that was India, the score of 39.1, which is about 2.7 points up from 2023. India became the third most powerful nation by overtaking Japan, which slipped to fourth. While India is behind 2 superpowers in Asia, it is also quite a bit ahead of other powers like Australia, Russia, South Korea, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Meanwhile, India's rival Pakistan ends up all the way at 16th on this list of 27 countries, between the Philippines and North Korea. Now, this is a pretty decent result for India. That's because between 2018 and 2023, India's national power on the Power Index actually fell considerably. Shocks from the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine impacted every single country in the world, including India. But this year, India's national power increased after years of decline. So what do the results actually say about what India does well? According to the report, India's fast economic growth is one of the key factors behind the country's geopolitical rise. In 2023 to 2024, India had an 8.2% growth rate, the fastest for a major economy and far ahead of many of its competitors in Asia. So, on the crucial metric of economic capability in the index, India increased its power score by 4.2 points. It also grew well in the segment of future resources because of its young population. This means that even as other powers like China, Japan, and South Korea grow old rapidly, India is expected to remain a fairly young country for decades in the future. So on future resources, India's score jumped by 8.2 points. India also did well on the metric of diplomatic influence. Experts who were surveyed appraised Prime Minister Narendra Modi's global leadership and strategic ambitions more highly. India increased its tempo of diplomatic activity in 2023, participating in the 6th highest number of dialogues with the Asia Power Index countries, the report says. India also hosted the G20 summit in 2023 and invested a lot of political and diplomatic capital into the event. Now, besides all of this, India's score in the category of national resilience improved significantly. Basically, national resilience is internal stability, economic and geopolitical security, as well as nuclear deterrence. And India's score here jumped by around 5 points. So that's all the good news for India. But the report also points out that India suffers pretty badly from what's called a power gap. Basically, a power gap refers to the difference between a country's available resources and its actual real-world influence. So countries that have more influence than their available resources have a positive power gap. And if you have less influence than you should, given your resources, you have a negative power gap. The big problem seems to be that India has a negative power balance, and this is increasing year by year. For example, in 2023, India's power gap in the Asia Power Index stood at minus 2.8 points. And this year, that number has gotten worse and stands at minus 3.9 points. So why exactly is this happening? Well, one major problem is India's economic influence in Asia. While India's economy is growing rapidly, its interconnections and economic ties with other Asian powers aren't as strong as they should be. In fact, India was overtaken this year when it comes to economic relationships. India's low-level economic integration with the larger economies in Asia and weak participation in the regional economic architecture means that this trend is set to continue, the report says. For example, just a few years ago, India refused to sign the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, also known as RCEP. Now, this was a major trade agreement that involved a number of major Asian countries. India's reasons for refusing to join were complex. But the point is that India isn't really as integrated with its other Asian economic partners, unlike countries like China, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore. So India also isn't really a center of investment or financial flows for the region, like other Asian powers. Besides this, it's also defense networks and alliances. India has stepped up its defense diplomacy with a lot of Asian countries, and its rising exports of arms and equipments, remember India's export of the BrahMos missile to the Philippines, has helped its ranking on defense-related issues. But outside of neighboring countries like Bhutan and Nepal, India doesn't really do defense alliances and partnerships, and that makes it a lot different from other Asian powers that are part of either China or America's alliance system in Asia. India's historic problems with doing defense alliances outside of its own region could mean that it gets left out of important defense groupings. For example, the hot new grouping everyone is talking about is the Squad: Philippines, Australia, Japan, and America. These are all American security allies, and their goals are very focused on defense and security cooperation. At the same time, you've seen groupings like the Quad, which includes India, actually refocus away from military and security focuses to other things like technology and climate change. A lot of the speculation around the Quad is that India is a big reason for that shift. New Delhi may have a good reason for this since it shares a border with China, and aggressive military moves against Beijing could have a direct impact on its security. But the report also argues that India's reluctance to cooperate with other countries on defense alliances means that other countries will simply choose to go ahead on defense integration without India, and that leaves India on the outside looking in. So that was the Asia Power Index 2024. There's a lot to feel good about in this report, from India's improved ranking to its increased diplomatic influence and economic power. But the report also makes clear that despite its economic, social, and military power, India is an underachiever. And if India is serious about its ambitions of being a leading power, that will need to change. Thank you so much for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Matu. You can catch this show again next week on India Today Global.